What if the flood wasn't a myth? What if it was a physics event, and the evidence is still embedded in the rock, in the ice, in your own DNA? Scientists cracking open Cretaceous amber found oxygen levels 35%, nearly double what we breathe today. Geneticists mapping human DNA found a near-extinction bottleneck exactly 4,500 years ago. 217 cultures on every continent preserved the same story independently. A warning, a vessel, a world that ended in a single afternoon. This is not a Sunday school lesson. This is a forensic investigation into the most catastrophic event in planetary history, told through geology, atmospheric physics, and ancient scripture that knew things it had no business knowing. 40 minutes, 24 chapters, one conclusion that will permanently change how you read both the Bible and a science textbook. Stay with me. This story belongs to all of us. Before the first ocean wave ever broke against a shore, before the first storm ever scarred the sky, there was a world so different from our own that modern science has no clean word for it. Not ancient, not primitive, something else entirely. A world sealed under a dome of vapor and pressure, breathing air twice as rich as anything alive today has ever known. A world where the rules of biology had not yet been broken, where time itself moved at a different speed inside the human body. That world is gone, but it left evidence, and the evidence is stranger than anything in scripture. Scientists drilling into Cretaceous amber, fossilized tree resin nearly 100 million years old by conventional dating, found something that stopped the laboratory cold. Trapped inside those golden beads of ancient sap were microscopic bubbles. Air bubbles, the atmosphere of a vanished world, preserved in perfect suspension. When they cracked those bubbles open and ran the analysis, the oxygen content read 35%. Today, the air we breathe is 21% oxygen. That is not a minor variation, that is a different planet. Under elevated atmospheric pressure, the human body behaves like a patient inside a hyperbaric chamber. Wounds heal faster, tissues rebuild more efficiently, and the cellular machinery that governs aging slows to a near halt. Read Genesis carefully. Methuselah lived 969 years, Jared 962, Noah himself 950. These numbers have always been treated as mythology. The amber says otherwise. But here is the problem that no one wants to say out loud. A world at double the atmospheric pressure, saturated with oxygen, is not just a paradise. It is a compressed system under enormous tension. And compressed systems, by the laws of physics, always find a way to release. In that pressurized Eden, size was not a disadvantage. It was an advantage. Bone density increases under sustained atmospheric pressure. Muscle fiber development accelerates. The creatures of the pre-flood world, including its human inhabitants, grew in ways that our current biology cannot replicate. Genesis calls them the Gibborim, the mighty ones, Nephilim. Translators have struggled with these words for centuries, oscillating between angels, giants, and demons. But the fossil record offers a more clinical description. In the Paluxy River basin of Texas, embedded in Cretaceous limestone, researchers have found what appear to be elongated human-like footprints alongside sauropod tracks. Prints stretching over 40 centimeters in length, pressing deep into the stone with a weight distribution that suggests enormous mass. Across Southeast Asia, fragments attributed to Meganthropus show jaw bones and cranial structures that dwarf modern human anatomy by a factor that makes comfortable classification impossible. These were not supernatural beings. They were the natural product of a world that had optimized for size. But optimization for size comes with a hidden cost. The skeletal architecture of these beings, broad, dense, low to the ground, tells a secondary story. The wear patterns on the bone. The structure of the orbital ridge. These were not gentle giants. They were apex predators, and they had been at the top of the food chain for a very long time. If you give a civilization 9 centuries per generation, what does it build? The question sounds theoretical until you hold the Antikythera mechanism in your hands. Recovered from a Greek shipwreck in 1901, this bronze device, a clockwork calculator of astronomical precision, was built roughly 2,000 years ago. Modern engineers required decades and computer-assisted tomography to fully reverse engineer its gear system. It was not supposed to exist. It is what archaeologists call an out-of-place artifact, an OOPArt, a data point that doesn't fit the accepted narrative of gradual technological development. The Book of Enoch, excluded from the canonical Bible but quoted directly within it, describes a pre-flood civilization that had mastered metallurgy, architecture, and what the text calls the secrets of heaven. The wickedness that triggered the judgment was not merely violence. The Hebrew text implies something more specific: the mixing of kinds, the manipulation of the boundaries of life itself. Genetic hybridization, the creation of things that were not meant to exist. And Enoch, alone among his generation, saw where it was leading. He did not disappear in a chariot of fire. He disappeared because he had been listening to the ground. The instructions were specific: 300 cubits in length, 50 in width, 30 in height. Using the most conservative cubit measurement, that vessel stretched approximately 450 feet long, longer than a modern football field. Naval architects at Hyundai Heavy Industries, working independently of any theological agenda, ran stability simulations on those exact proportions and arrived at a result that has never been satisfactorily explained away. The 6-to-1 length-to-width ratio is the precise configuration that maximizes stability in extreme wave conditions. Not approximate, precise. The wood itself presents an equally startling problem. The Hebrew word translated as gopher wood appears nowhere else in Scripture and corresponds to no known species. Current materials, science offers a candidate: densified wood laminate, impregnated with resin under pressure, capable of withstanding over 10,000 pounds per square inch. This was not a vessel built for navigation. It had no rudder, no sail, no oar. It was built to do one thing: refuse to sink for as long as the water lasted. They did not need to be called. 3 days before the first crack appeared in the ocean floor, the animals began to move. Elephants communicate through infrasound, vibrations below the threshold of human hearing, transmitted through the ground over distances of hundreds of miles. Before the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, wildlife reserves recorded mass animal migrations inland hours before any instrument detected seismic activity. The pre-flood rupture would have broadcast its arrival through the entire planetary crust like a struck bell. The animals were not tamed, they were terrified. And when the last pair crossed the threshold of that enormous wooden hull, something happened that no naturalist has ever been able to fully explain. The birds stopped singing, not gradually, not species by species, all of them, everywhere on Earth. A silence so complete it had no precedent. The door sealed behind them. The Hebrew word is sakar, meaning an airtight, pressurized closure, not merely a wooden door swung shut. And then they waited. 7 days. The sun still rose and set. The sky was still blue. But inside the crust, something was building toward a release that would end the world they had always known. On the 7th morning, those outside looked at the horizon. It had turned white. White is not the color of rain. White is the color of pressure releasing faster than the eye can process. What happened next was not a storm. It was not a flood in any sense that word has ever been used before or since. It was a planetary system reaching the end of its structural tolerance all at once, in every direction, simultaneously. The people standing outside that sealed wooden hull had perhaps 40 seconds between the moment the horizon turned white and the moment the ground beneath their feet ceased to exist. 40 seconds to understand that every assumption they had ever made about the permanence of the world was wrong. 10 miles below the surface of the pre-flood Earth, water existed in a state that has no analog in ordinary experience. Scientists call it supercritical water, a phase of matter that occurs when liquid is subjected to temperatures above 374 degrees Celsius and pressures exceeding 220 times atmospheric. At that threshold, water ceases to behave as either liquid or gas. It becomes something in between, a fluid with the density of liquid and the expansive energy of superheated steam, chemically aggressive, under pressure so extreme that the rock surrounding it was the only thing preventing a catastrophic and instantaneous release. The hydroplate theory, developed by physicist Walter Brown, proposes that a continuous layer of this supercritical water, an ocean stored in the mantle, not on the surface, ran beneath the entire crust of the pre-flood Earth. When the first fracture opened, it did not spread slowly. The crack propagated around the circumference of the globe in approximately 2 hours. And the water that had been sealed underground for the entire history of civilization did not seep upward. It detonated, columns of supercritical fluid punching through 5 miles of granite at twice the speed of sound, reaching the upper atmosphere in seconds, breaching the exosphere and dispersing into the vacuum of space. The fountains of the great deep were not springs. They were geological cannons, firing simultaneously across every ocean basin on Earth. The people standing in the open did not drown first. They were struck by supersonic water columns with the kinetic energy of nuclear detonations. The text says the waters prevailed. The physics says they vaporized everything in their path before the first drop of rain ever fell. Above the rupture line, the vapor canopy, that pressurized shell of water suspended in the upper atmosphere, had one direction to go: down. In thermodynamics, this process is called condensation, and it releases what engineers call latent heat, the thermal energy stored inside water vapor when it transitions back to liquid. If the entire canopy had condensed at once, the thermal release would have raised global temperatures past the threshold of survivability. It should have cooked the planet. It did not. The reason lies in the same fountains that opened the rupture. Those supersonic columns of water punching through the atmosphere and into space were not merely destroying, they were ventilating. Each column acted as a thermal exhaust pipe, drawing superheated atmosphere upward and ejecting it beyond the Earth's gravity. The planet was cooling itself through its own catastrophe. But the rain that fell was not clean. The fountains carried with them everything they passed through on the way up: pulverized rock, minerals, radioactive isotopes freed from their geological containment, and the biological material of the ocean floor compressed into a slurry of ice crystals and debris at altitude before falling back as something closer to a global toxic mudfall than rainfall. Those outside did not experience a downpour. They experienced burial. The continents were not always where they are now. This is not a controversial statement. Plate tectonics is established science. What remains fiercely contested is the speed. Conventional geology proposes that continental drift operates at centimeters per year, accumulating over hundreds of millions of years into the current configuration. But the hydroplate model offers a mechanism that changes the equation entirely. As the supercritical water escaped laterally from the subterranean chamber, the continental plates, now floating on a layer of escaping fluid, lost their frictional resistance to the bedrock beneath them. They began to hydroplane, not inches per year, miles per hour. The mid-Atlantic ridge, that scorched volcanic seam running from Iceland to Antarctica, is the scar left behind when two supercontinents tore apart from each other at a speed that fractured and incinerated the ocean floor in their wake. The ridge wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball, not because of millions of years of slow spreading, but because it was torn open in a single catastrophic event. And as the continental masses accelerated away from each other, the ocean floor buckled inward at the leading edges, pushing upward with a force that had no geological precedent. The Himalayas, the Andes, the Rockies, not ancient mountains worn smooth by eons of erosion, fresh mountains thrust upward in a single afternoon, still raw, still sharp, rising out of an ocean that had not yet finished moving. Before the rupture, the geological column was a living ocean, a living forest, a living plain. The flood turned it into a document. The mechanism is called hydrodynamic sorting, and it is as simple as it is devastating to the standard interpretation of the fossil record. When catastrophic water sweeps across a landscape, it does not bury organisms randomly. It sorts them. Heavy marine creatures sink first and are buried deepest. Mobile land animals flee to higher ground and are buried last. Creatures organized by habitat and by their ability to escape, not by their position on an evolutionary timeline. This is why trilobites, seafloor creatures, appear at the bottom of the column. This is why seashells appear on the summit of Mount Everest at 29,000 feet, not because that peak slowly rose from the sea over millions of years, but because the water was there first and left its contents behind when it receded. And in the Paluxy River Formation, the same limestone that holds those anomalous human-like prints, researchers have documented what appear to be human footprints inside geological strata classified as Cretaceous. If the evolutionary timeline is correct, that is impossible. The drowning map says it happened. The timeline is not ancient. The timeline is a single year. The heat produced by the rupture had nowhere to go but into the ocean. As the continental plates hydroplaned and the volcanic activity reached its global maximum, the temperature of the deep ocean climbed past anything the surface world could have measured. On the ocean floor, rapid basalt formation was occurring at a rate that no uniformitarian model predicts or permits. And frozen into that cooling basalt, like a magnetic recording etched into stone, are the reversals of the Earth's magnetic field. In normal geological theory, each reversal takes thousands of years to complete. The basalt record at the mid-ocean ridges shows dozens of reversals stacked in formations that cooled in a matter of months. The magnetic field of the Earth was spinning like a compass held next to an electromagnet, flipping, restoring, flipping again, as the planetary dynamo destabilized under the thermal assault. Inside the Ark, 8 human beings and their cargo of living creatures were sealed in total darkness on a sea that was no longer a sea. It was a thermal engine, generating storm systems of a scale that no modern meteorologist has modeled, for the simple reason that the energy input is outside all recorded parameters. Hypercanes, theoretical storm systems 5 times the size and intensity of a Category 5 hurricane, would have been the meteorological baseline. The vessel did not sail through them. It was simply too heavy, too perfectly proportioned, too low in the water to be overturned. And in the absolute darkness of that hull, with the sound of the world ending on every side, the biological light of bioluminescent fungi, the only plausible internal light source for a sealed vessel, cast its pale blue glow across the faces of the only 8 people left alive on Earth. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is what remains when everything that was making sound has stopped. For Noah and his family, sealed inside that hull with the roar of hypercanes pressing against every timber, silence was not available. But a different kind of silence had settled over the interior of that vessel. The silence of 16,000 animals that were no longer behaving like animals. No roaring, no panic. No, the endless biological chaos that 8 people managing that many creatures in an enclosed space should have produced. Something had changed in the atmospheric chemistry of the sealed ark. The pressure differential, the altered oxygen ratios, the shift in barometric conditions. Something had triggered in the animals a response that their physiology had always been capable of, but had never before been required to express at scale. The hibernoma gland, identified in brown bears and proposed by some researchers as a vestigial organ present in many mammalian species, produces a compound that suppresses metabolism, lowers body temperature, and induces a state of biological suspension that can be sustained for months without feeding. The ark was not a zoo, it was a hibernation chamber. Most of the animals were not awake. Most of them were barely alive, their bodies running at a fraction of normal metabolic rate, breathing slowly in the compressed darkness, waiting for a world that no longer existed to be replaced by one that did not yet exist. But the predators, the unclean animals, as Scripture designates them, were different. They did not sleep, they paced. And in the darkness, on a sea that was still churning with the aftershocks of a planetary rupture, 8 human beings learned to live with the sound of things that wanted to eat them, separated by nothing but timber and pitch and the mathematics of an engineering specification given by God. The water did not recede evenly. It could not. The post-flood Earth was a landscape of radical topographic instability, new mountain ranges still rising, ocean basins still deepening, continental shelves still finding their final angles of repose. What the water did was drain, and where it drained, it left behind vast inland seas, temporary oceans trapped behind natural dams of glacial debris and volcanic rock, holding volumes of water that no lake in the modern world approaches. The peak that arrested the ark's drift was in the Ararat Range, in what is now eastern Turkey. The Hebrew word Ararat carries within its root structure the meaning of a curse reversed, the mountain of the new beginning. At 14,000 feet on that range, geologists have found what is called pillow lava, a formation that only occurs when volcanic material erupts directly into water. The mountain was not above the flood, it was inside it. The water was above the mountain, and as it drained, it did not trickle away over centuries. In 1980, the eruption of Mount St. Helens deposited 600 feet of stratified geological layers in a single afternoon and carved a canyon system 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon in less than 2 days. Scale that mechanism to a global drainage event involving volumes of water that dwarf every modern ocean, and the Grand Canyon, 277 miles long, a mile deep, was not carved by the Colorado River over 5 million years. It was carved in approximately 48 hours by a post-flood drainage event of continental proportions. Noah, standing at the window of the ark as the mountain emerged around him, was not looking at the ancient earth. He was looking at a freshly carved world, still raw, still draining, still finding the shapes it would hold for the next 4,000 years. When the water pulled back from the continental shelves, it did not pull back from everywhere equally. Portions of what had been the pre-flood landmass remained submerged permanently, pressed down by the weight of the new ocean, or flooded by the drainage of the inland seas as they finally breached their barriers. In the North Sea, between Britain and continental Europe, sonar imaging has revealed a lost landscape called Doggerland. Forests, river valleys, and settlement sites now lying under 150 feet of cold water, preserved in sediment that has kept their outlines intact for millennia. In the Gulf of Kambat, off the western coast of India, marine archaeologists using side-scan sonar identified in 2001 the geometric remains of a structured settlement at a depth of 120 feet. Organized foundations, right angles, what appear to be streets. Carbon dating of retrieved biological material from the site produced dates clustering around 9,500 years ago by conventional reckoning, which places it within the post-flood resettlement period. These are not primitive encampments. The geometric regularity of the Kambat site suggests an architectural sophistication that does not fit the narrative of scattered hunter-gatherers slowly developing civilization. These are the footprints of people who already knew how to build cities because their parents had lived in one. And at the Durupina site in eastern Turkey, 17 miles south of the summit of Mount Ararat, a satellite radar anomaly buried under ice and debris measures 310 feet in length, within the measurement range of the Ark's specifications. The Turkish government classified the site. The files have not been reopened. Before anything could grow, the chemistry had to reset. The post-flood ocean was a catastrophic mixture. Fresh water from the collapsed canopy and the subterranean reservoirs, salt water from the pre-flood seas, thermal venting minerals, radioactive isotopes, pulverized biological material from 1 billion drowned organisms decomposing simultaneously across every ocean basin on Earth. The salt concentration of the world's oceans is measurable, and it is increasing at a calculable rate as rivers continuously carry dissolved minerals to the sea. Working backward from current measurements, geochemist calculations suggest the ocean cannot be more than a few thousand years old at current accumulation rates, a figure that aligns with a post-flood origin far more comfortably than with a 4 billion-year timeline. Freshwater species and saltwater species faced an existential chemical boundary that shifted around them in real time as the ocean sought equilibrium. Those that could adapt did. Those that could not left their remains in the geological record alongside everything else the flood had sorted and buried. On land, the situation was equally hostile. The soil across the new Earth was saturated with salt, stripped of topsoil, chemically toxic from the decomposing biomass of the previous world. The text implies a decade before viable agriculture returned, a decade of survival on stored provisions, on what the Ark had carried, on the biological reserves of people who had been sealed in a wooden box for over a year, waiting for poison to drain from the dirt. Before Noah sent the dove, he sent the raven. The distinction matters. The raven is a scavenger. It does not need dry land. It needs food, and food it found in abundance without ever returning to the vessel that released it. The surface of the post-flood ocean, for months after the initial event, was covered by what marine geologists call log mats, vast floating islands of vegetation, compressed organic material, soil and debris that the flood had stripped from every continent and deposited on the surface of the new sea. These mats extended for thousands of miles in some regions. They were ecosystems in themselves, bacteria, insects, small organisms clinging to survival on rafts of dead forest. And beneath them, and tangled within them, and washing against the new shorelines in drifts miles deep, the bodies. Every human being who had stood in the open when the horizon turned white. Every animal that had not reached the vessel in time. 1 billion corpses or more distributed across the surface of a planet-sized grave. The raven found its feast and did not come back. When the dove returned with an olive branch, not a seed, not a cutting, but a living branch from a tree that had survived somewhere, it meant something more than dry land. It meant that the biochemistry of the new soil had reached the threshold where photosynthesis was possible again. It meant the poison was draining. It meant the world was attempting cautiously to resume. When the door of the Ark finally opened, and the Hebrew text specifies that Noah waited for a direct instruction before opening it, suggesting that the atmospheric conditions outside required confirmation before re-entry, the first thing he felt was cold. Not the cold of a mild morning. Cold as a new physical experience. The vapor canopy that had regulated the pre-flood climate had been gone for over a year. Without it, the Earth's thermal regulation was gone with it. The poles, no longer insulated by a planetary greenhouse membrane, began to accumulate ice at a rate that would freeze the Siberian steppes within decades. The equatorial zones, no longer cooled by the canopy's diffusion of solar radiation, intensified toward the heat signatures we associate with modern tropics. The world that Noah stepped into was not recognizable as the world he had sealed himself away from. It was colder, it was emptier. The sky was a different color. The mountains were new and sharp and wrong, and standing at the threshold of that enormous wooden hull on a slope of fresh volcanic rock 14,000 feet above an ocean that was still finding its level, Noah experienced something no human being before him had ever experienced. He felt the future pressing against him like a cold wind, and he had no map for it. Every human being alive today carries inside every cell of their body a small, separate genome, a ring of genetic code housed not in the nucleus, but in the mitochondria, the ancient energy-producing structures that our cells inherited from a time before complex life existed. This mitochondrial DNA passes exclusively through the maternal line, unchanged, except by rare mutation, generation after generation, an unbroken biological thread stretching back through every mother to every grandmother to the origin point of the entire human lineage. When population geneticists map the global distribution of mitochondrial DNA variations, they find something that no model of gradual human evolution comfortably explains. Every human being on Earth traces back to one of three distinct maternal lineages, not dozens, not hundreds, three. And the genetic diversity of the entire human species, 8 billion people across every continent and culture, is dramatically lower than the diversity found within a single troop of chimpanzees. Geneticists call this a bottleneck event, a near extinction, a point in the past where the breeding population of the human species was reduced to a number so small that almost all prior genetic variation was lost forever. The secular dating of this bottleneck, derived from measured mutation rates in the mitochondrial sequence, places it at approximately 4,500 years ago. The wives of Noah's 3 sons were not a religious symbol. They were the 3 mothers. And the blood running through every human body on Earth today, through every person who has ever lived since that mountain in Ararat, carries within its molecular structure the memory of water. Before the flood, the Earth did not tilt. The axis ran perpendicular to the orbital plane, producing a world of perpetual mild seasons, the same temperature roughly at every latitude at every time of year. The vapor canopy above diffused solar radiation evenly, and the atmospheric pressure held the thermal gradient flat. There were no winters, no summers. The text of Genesis does not mention seasons until after the flood. The covenant language specifically introduces seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter as new features of the post-flood world. The rupture event, with its asymmetric ejection of supercritical water from the fountains of the deep, imparted a rotational torque to the planetary body that physics would predict. The Earth's axis shifted. The current tilt is 23.5 degrees from perpendicular. That single number, 23.5, is the entire explanation for every season, every winter, every summer, every harvest cycle in human history. It is also, according to the atmospheric models, the primary driver of the progressive lifespan reduction documented in Genesis after the flood. Methuselah lived 969 years in the pressurized canopy world. His descendants, breathing thinner air under an unfiltered sun with no thermal regulation, began living shorter lives with each generation. By the time of Moses, the human lifespan had compressed to 70 years. The tilt of the Earth is not a geological footnote. It is a biological sentence written in the angle of a planet that was struck by its own catastrophe and never fully recovered. They were standing in a field, eating, not running, not fleeing, simply grazing in a landscape that was, by every available biological indicator, temperate and vegetated. And then, within a time frame that the chemistry of their stomach contents makes brutally clear, they were frozen solid from the outside in, at temperatures that modern Siberia does not regularly reach, at a speed that left the grass they were chewing still identifiable in their mouths. The mammoths of Siberia are not a gradual ice age mystery. They are a forensic record of a snap freeze, a thermal event so sudden and so severe that digestion had not yet begun in animals that were already dead and crystallizing. The buttercups found in their stomachs are a subtropical species. They were not standing in a tundra. They were standing in what had been, until the collapse of the vapor canopy, a temperate grassland at high latitude, kept warm by the planetary greenhouse that the flood had destroyed. When the canopy fell, the poles lost their insulation in a geological instant. The permafrost did not advance slowly northward. It arrived. And the mammoths, still grazing in a world that had ceased to exist around them, were sealed into the ice like specimens in amber. Frozen monuments to the moment the old climate ended and the new one began without warning or transition. The mountain keeps its secrets under ice and political classification. Pilots flying reconnaissance over eastern Turkey during the Second World War reported an anomalous structure emerging from the glacier on the northeast face of Greater Ararat. A dark, elongated shape, partially exposed by an unusually warm summer thaw, with dimensions and proportions that did not match any natural rock formation. Their reports were filed. The files were transferred. The CIA holds materials related to the Ararat anomaly that have not been fully declassified. In 1960, aerial photography captured the Durupina Formation, that boat-shaped impression in the volcanic hillside 17 miles south of the summit, at a scale and with a regularity of outline that prompted scientific investigation. Core samples taken from the site in the 1980s and 1990s revealed petrified organic material with a carbon-to-sulfur ratio consistent with ancient laminated wood. The Turkish government has designated the surrounding area a national security zone. The mountain is not open. Whatever is under that ice has been under it long enough to petrify, long enough to be encased in volcanic debris, long enough that the glacier above it has moved and shifted and partially revealed it in warm years and reburied it in cold ones. It is not a legend buried up there. It is a structure. And the question is no longer whether something is on that mountain. The question is what the answer would do to every institution built on the assumption that it isn't. The rainbow had never existed before. This is not a theological statement dressed as science. It is an atmospheric physics argument with a clean, logical structure. A rainbow requires two things: liquid water droplets in the air and direct sunlight passing through them at a specific angle. In the pre-flood world, under the vapor canopy, sunlight did not reach the surface in direct beams. It was diffused, scattered uniformly through a planetary lens of suspended water vapor that distributed light with the evenness of an overcast sky on a global scale. Direct, angled sunlight striking individual raindrops to produce the precise prismatic separation of wavelengths that generates a visible rainbow was physically impossible in that atmospheric configuration. The first rainbow appeared because the canopy was gone, because the sky was now open and thin and unprotected in a way it had never been before. The covenant God made with Noah, sealed with that spectrum of light, was not merely a promise written in color. It was a physics lesson. The rainbow does not just say, "It will not flood again." It says the system that made the flood possible is gone. The canopy is gone. The pressurized subterranean water is gone, expelled into space by the fountains of the deep. The conditions that produce the world of Eden cannot be reconstructed by any natural mechanism. But the rainbow carries within it a second message. legible only in retrospect. The canopy was also protection, a shield against unfiltered solar radiation, a thermal regulator, a biological life support system for a species that was designed to live inside it. Its absence is not only a sign of safety, it is a sign of permanent exposure. 217 distinct cultures across every inhabited continent and every major island chain in the human world carry within their oral traditions a story about water, a world-ending flood, a righteous man warned in advance, a vessel of survival, animals taken aboard in pairs, a bird sent out to find land, a covenant offered when the water receded. The Epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed on clay tablets in ancient Mesopotamia centuries before the oldest surviving manuscripts of Genesis, describes a flood so structurally identical to the biblical account that secular scholars have spent decades arguing about literary borrowing, which culture copied from which. But that argument assumes the story is a story. What if it is a report? What if 217 cultures independently preserved the same account, not because they were trading myths along ancient trade routes, but because they all descended from the same 8 people, who descended from the same mountain, who carried the same memory into every language and every land they eventually reached? The trauma hypothesis in modern psychology recognizes that sufficiently extreme experiences encode themselves not just in conscious memory, but in behavioral patterns, cultural practices, and the deep narrative structures that societies use to explain their own existence. The flood is in our blood, not as metaphor, as cellular memory, as the genetic bottleneck that makes every human being on Earth a cousin of every other, as the mitochondrial echo of 3 women standing on a cold mountain in Turkey, looking out over a world that had just been remade. And beneath the ocean floors, in the recharging chambers of the deep, in the volcanic systems that run along every mid-ocean ridge, in the supercritical water that physics tells us is still down there, the pressure is building. The first judgment came by water. The last, every tradition agrees, arrives by fire. The fountains of the deep are not empty. They are waiting,